Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are talking about a topic that we know will be incredibly relatable for a lot of you out there, and that is how to say no. So we're talking about how to create boundaries and say no, but without burning bridges, because saying no can feel hard, and very often it feels hard and it feels awkward because you worry about the impact on the relationship or how someone else might perceive you if and when you say no. Pam, this is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because certainly when I was trying to think about some of the examples and what would be most relatable, I know I was like, my whole aura kind of says no on my behalf. This is not something that I find a real challenge. But equally, I know that for so many of my clients, this is something where they can feel themselves almost getting sucked into the vortex of saying yes to things that they actually want to say no to. So how was it for you in your career? Were you a yes person, a bit of a people pleaser, or were you not quite good for saying no?
I think at the start, I was very much on the side of being a people pleaser. I didn't want to say no. And I always remember when one of my managers, who I thought was an absolutely amazing leader, she said to me, Pamela, no is a full sentence and you need to realize that. And that for me was like a huge eye opener. I wasn't that far out of university. I was still learning. I wanted to make a great impression. I didn't want to miss any opportunities. I wanted to do everything. Like I was trying to do everything and I didn't really have any boundaries. And we've talked about boundaries before on the podcast. It was very busy. Let's just say that. I just literally never had a moment to think because I was constantly taking on new things and I really struggled with saying no. And when I reflected on that later in my career, it really came from a place of how others perceived me. And I didn't want to disappoint people. I didn't want to come across as not good at my job, somebody who couldn't do all of the stuff, because who even was I if I couldn't do all of the stuff? And I really struggled with it at the start of my career. And then after my lovely manager said to me, no is a full sentence. And at first I was like, it's not actually, it's just one word. And it's a really difficult one to say. When people are coming at you with all the different requests, it is the hardest thing to say. And that was where I suppose I had to start flexing almost, I'd probably say my no muscle, because you have to start saying no to things in order to feel comfortable and confident in doing that. And that was a huge turning point for me. And that was very early on in my career. And there were still times as time went on that I would think, if I say no to this, what does that mean? What are going to be the consequences or the impacts? And I didn't want to damage my reputation at all. So there was plenty of times when I probably still said yes when the answer should have still been no, but I was really focused on putting those boundaries in place and saying no a lot more when it was necessary, and it did help.
It's so interesting hearing you describe that. It sets off the neuroscience geek in me, because that element that you described that is so relatable of what will other people think? What will it mean about me if I say no? What will the consequences be? Will I be perceived as I can't hack it? I can't handle everything? Will I be perceived as stubborn or resistant? Will I be perceived as being bolshy or rude? There's so many different thoughts and emotions that I think run through people's head. And to give a bit of context in terms of how our brains work, is that we as humans are wired for connection. And in evolutionary terms, more so even for women, that element of if you weren't part of a tribe, if you weren't accepted, if you weren't in the in crowd, then you were potentially at risk. If you were living out in the wild and your children were with you, you were reliant on community and on connection with other people for your physical safety. And so the way our brains have evolved is that we still feel that risk associated if we think other people are going to judge us. Because although we're not at risk necessarily, although we're certainly not at physical risk, if somebody judges us, your brain still creates the same emotions on the basis of if you feel judged or if you feel like somebody is going to perceive you in a way that you don't want to be perceived. So it's a real kind of powerful element, isn't it? And that aspect that you describe of flexing your no muscle and getting to the point of that being a little bit more comfortable is also about breaking a habit. It's also about understanding that maybe the consequences aren't that dramatic after all. So how did you go about starting to flex that no muscle? What would you say to somebody who is in, so the client that I described, where I messaged her and said, this is something that I'm looking for relatable examples of, and I'm drawing a blank. An example that she gave was accepting a meeting request where she needs to be on site is several hours away, but she's in a probation period. She's new in a role. That's why we're working together. And so she doesn't want to say no to her boss because there's that element of being like obstinate or not being flexible, or so it very much feels like it's related to what you're describing. So if my client were in front of you, what would you be saying to her as to how could she start to flex the no muscle?
I think the key thing is, first of all, just making sure that you know what you need to deliver in your role, because it's so easy when you're not clear on what you need to deliver and what the overall objectives are for yourself, for the team, for the business. It's easy to just keep taking on more and more stuff and get pulled in different directions and be dragged into meetings that you don't need to go to, or at least be on site for. So I think the first thing is making sure that you're really clear on what it is that you need to deliver. And then the next thing is then looking at, okay, this thing that you are now asking me to do, does this add value? Does this help me achieve my objectives? Does this help me drive the business forward? Or actually, are you just asking me to be there? There's no real purpose to the meetings. You just want me to show my face. What is the point of me going? And you can ask that in a really nice way. What is the purpose of the meeting? What input do you need from me? And then once you understand that, you can then make a call on whether this is just information that you can send into the meeting notes, into the meeting report, whatever format that is happening in. And you can also find out, is it really imperative that you are there in person to sit around that table, or could you join by phone at a specific time, or could you join by Zoom? There's so many different ways now. Like, we're experts now, aren't we, at working remotely? That's probably one of the early benefits of COVID, isn't it? That we're now experts at working remotely. So it is about just finding out what is the purpose, what input do you need from me? And then you make a call then on how you proceed and what is necessary.
And I think another thing I would add to that is that you can propose alternatives that work better for you. So in that instance, you could ask those questions about what's the purpose of the meeting. We talked about this in the episode recently about reducing your time spent in meetings. You could ask the question of what's the purpose? What does my contribution need to be? Do I need to be on site? But also, you could ask that question that says, you've put a meeting request in for this day. I'm due to be in the office the following week. Given the length of the journey, can we try and combine getting some time together when I'm going to be in the office already? And that's presenting an alternative solution that, and who knows on the details of the circumstances, whether there was other people to the meeting, whether that might be possible or not. But I think sometimes saying no is hard, but presenting an alternative solution can make that feel a bit easier because you're giving someone something that they can say yes to rather than it being a kind of, oh, and now I'm going to have to ask and they might say no and then I'll feel even more awkward.
Yeah, and it's just about being the most effective in your role, isn't it? And I think if you understand what you need to deliver and you're checking in on, what they need, then it's a really, it almost makes it like, it simplifies it, doesn't it? I think that's the thing. It just simplifies everything. So you're not left feeling uncomfortable because in that situation where that person is in the probation period, that can be really scary because what if I say no to a meeting and they think bad of me? What if that affects them keeping me on at the end of the probation? Like there's all of that stuff that goes through your head as well. And then if you're not in a probation period, then maybe you'd be thinking about your reputation or what you'll miss out on in that meeting. But ultimately, it is just about kind of knowing your place and making sure that you're making decisions that will benefit you and the business so that you are achieving and you are driving the business forward.
And I think it's important as well to recognize the short-term pain for long-term gain of saying no. If saying no is difficult for you, you can say yes to something that you don't really want to say yes to. But what then comes with saying yes is short term, you haven't had to say no. So you've got a tick in the box that you haven't had to do the awkward thing. But then sometimes the resentment that can come from that can go on if in that situation where you've said yes to. So thinking about pay rises, for example, for promotions, when I have clients that are working towards a promotion, they will often say yes to the package that's been offered because it would feel uncomfortable to say no or to ask for more. And so they'll say yes to something that they don't want to say yes to. And then they're kicking themselves 3 or 6 months down the line when they find that so-and-so in the equivalent position in a different area is on $5,000 or 10 grand more than them. So I think it's reminding yourself that, okay, I want to say no to this, or I want to have a boundary around this. I could just go with what gets me through and accept it, but that's actually going to come with longer term consequences in terms of I will be frustrated, I will be resentful, I'll be annoyed by this. So actually, if I've tried, even if it's not successful, then at least I've tried to do it the way that I want to do it, or to say no, or whatever that may be.
Yeah, and I think that does really make a difference as well. I worked with a guy like years ago who said no to everything, absolutely everything. There was no give or take, and it was always a no. And then he would then go and find out the information and then decide if it was a yes. So, like the total extreme opposite, just no to absolutely everything, every meeting, every request for support, and all of the rest of it. And he said that he did that to make sure that he was delivering and that he was able to control his time better and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, he got a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a pain, for not being involved in anything. Whereas if he'd have offered an alternative and just said, or just simply asked, what do you need me for? What is the purpose? It would have made a huge difference. And he did have a real reputation. And it got to the point where it was like, don't even ask him because he'll just say no. There was no compromise at all.
That compromise element is so key, isn't it? And another area that's really important is to consider not just what impact it has for you if you say yes, but also potentially for others. So one of the times that I think people find it really hard to say no, like you were describing earlier on, is when it comes to workload. So if you're asked to be involved in something or deliver something, then it can be hard to say no to your own boss. But the consequence of that is then potentially either you're asking more of your team or you're asking more of yourself, and therefore you're less able to support your team in other ways. So there's also that element of really being aware of when you're saying yes to one thing, what are you then also saying no to? Because in that example, you haven't said no to your boss, you've taken on the extra tasks or the higher target or kicking off this project sooner, but then that's going to have a consequence, whether that's for you personally or whether that's for others or whether it's a combination of both. It will have a consequence. So what are you saying no to in order to say yes to your boss? Yes, I'll do the extra tasks, because there's an implied no that you haven't actually said.
Yeah, and that's a different way, isn't it, of thinking about it as well. And there's so much more to it, isn't there, than just a simple no. There always is a lot more depth. And I think as a leader, as a manager, saying no is just something that we definitely need to think more about doing, and actually taking that action and saying no, so that we do keep control of our workloads and all of the other stuff that we need to do, and we're still able to deliver for the business.
And I think a final point that I would probably add, and it's only really on reflecting as we're having this conversation that I've recognized some of that. How did I say no and was okay with it? And it's probably no surprise coming from a coach, but one tactic that I used was to ask questions. Because if you reply to a request with questions, what you'll often find is that the request isn't what you thought it was, or it's not been thought through, or there isn't an answer. And I still remember my boss was going to a meeting and there was a system change that was being required and that we were in the planning stages for. And there was all of this feedback where effectively I was putting my boss in the situation where he read through it and was like, oh my God, I am going to be so unpopular having to say all of these things. And I was like, you won't have to say all of those things, because if you ask these questions, their answer will be no, and that will give us some thinking time. If you, for example, ask the question in that situation, I think it was about how long would it take to develop this functionality so that we can do this? So I'm not saying, no, we won't do that. I'm asking the question of the people that are developing the system, how long will this depend? So it's not me being obstructive and saying, no, we won't do that operationally. It was then the answer to that question meant that, oh, it's not important enough for us to worry about developing that functionality. So I didn't actually have to say no. And I think those types of situations, when you ask for more clarity, when you ask for an understanding, when it comes to tasks, for example, a really helpful question can be, okay, if I've got this last minute request, the Chaos Boss episode, can you just do this within 48 hours? Okay, these were the things that were on my priority list for this week. Are you okay for those not to happen so that we can meet the deadline for this? Oh. And suddenly there's a rethink on how important the can you just thing really is, because if it means that won't happen. So yeah, I think asking questions in return can often be a way to actually get the other person to recognize that maybe what they'd asked for or what you wanted to say no to isn't required or isn't such a priority as they've maybe implied.
Yeah, and that is absolutely spot on, isn't it? Because those can you just requests can really pile up. And if you are a yes person, you are going to be bombarded, inundated, drowning in those tasks before you know it, aren't you, really?
Yeah, it is really challenging to pull yourself back out of those. That kind of brings us to the end of this week's episode. We hope that has been helpful. If you are that person who does struggle and potentially has loads of demands placed on you as a result, do message us, connect with us, let us know whether you've tried any of these tactics and how you find them when you put them into play. And please do share this with anyone that you know may tend towards being a people pleaser, and let them benefit from the guidance too. We love recording these episodes, and we would really appreciate it if you would go and rate and review. We know we say this every single week, but it really does make a difference to us being found on podcast platforms if we've got strong ratings and reviews. And we will be back with another episode next week. Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.